In thinking about exactly what the academic discourse analysis would be, start by noticing the similarity between the title of this project and the title of the last one. Really, the only difference is one word where we have the academic discourse analysis here. You'll probably recall that in the previous project, it was the public discourse analysis. This is intentional. One of the main points that we're going to make in the writing of this essay is going to be comparing the way that a subject is known through public discourse versus the way that same subject is known through academic discourse. A reminder, public discourse is the constant ongoing communication having to do with a subject of public importance, carried out through any one of a wide variety of venues which facilitate the greatest variety of people, making their assertions known to one another in a variety of ways. Now, the one part of that we had to massage a little bit to make the last project work was the wide variety. You see that word repeated several times here. To make sure that we were able to narrow our scope of focus and address one thing in particular, we looked at how public discourse is carried out through social media. Had we simply left that wide open and been forced to survey all of the variety of ways that a single subject was discussed in public discourse, it would have ended up being a very, very large project, and that's simply not something we had time for. Academic discourse, however, is a little bit different and it's a lot more focused. Academic discourse is the constant ongoing communication having to do with a subject of disciplinary importance, carried out through the writing and publication of scholarly research in an academic journal, in which scholars in the single field of the journal, in which scholars in the single field the journal pertains to make their assertions known in accepted, established, disciplinarily proven ways. This is really important to note, comes directly from the reading from chapter 12 of The Informed Writer by Bazerman. That is the course textbook, which is all about the way that disciplines, knowledge, and methods intersect in the scholarly writing process. Notice the phrases in this definition of academic discourse, which serve to limit the variety of ways and even the variety of content that we'll be finding as we look at the way that academic discourse is used to discuss the same subject that we were already looking at. First, we'll be looking at it in terms of a subject of disciplinary importance, that is, importance to a specific discipline or subject area. After that, we'll be looking at it in terms of the way that scholarly research in an academic journal has been done to address the subject. Anytime we deal with academic discourse, the people who are carrying that on are scholars in that field of study. Specifically, it'll be a single field of study that a journal pertains to, and journals can be very, very focused in the specific things that they deal with versus those that they don't. And lastly, instead of assertions made in any sort of a variety of ways, instead, in academic discourse, assertions are made in accepted, established, disciplinarily proven ways. Let's think then about what the big differences are in general about popular writing and sources versus scholarly writing and sources. Now, all of these things come from a specific website. As usual, I've got a link to this presentation that'll go along with the video. So if you want to pull up the presentation and explore the links, go ahead and do so. Popular sources tend to come from a staff writer or journalist, generally not an expert in any one particular field. In popular sources are generally not cited. They might not even be well known, but instead are chosen for interest over authority, right? So these are sources that are chosen because they're interesting to read about, but not necessarily because they possess any authority having to do with the subject. In popular sources, generally these are reviewed by a single editor for clarity, correctness, and popular appeal. The purpose of a popular source is usually to inform, entertain, or persuade the widest possible audience. And even though these things could be short or could be in depth and longer, they are rarely as long as 10 pages. On the other hand, within scholarly sources, number one, authors are researchers in the field and they generally have credentials or affiliations. In fact, an author who is going to get their writing published in a scholarly source is usually an expert in that specific field. They're not generalists. In scholarly sources, these sources are also scholarly. They are cited often, they are discussed, and they are made available to the reader. Here we have our sources chosen because they are already authoritative on the subject matter being discussed. These are peer reviewed by same field experts and multiple, oftentimes we've got three or more experts in this process for accuracy of content and approach. Scholarly sources are meant to present research findings and expand disciplinary knowledge. And lastly, they're often long, more than 10 pages, and they're meant for other scholars and researchers, not the general public. I have here a case study for you. They are two articles, one's popular, one is scholarly. They both have to do with the same subject matter, and actually, the popular article is based on the scholarly one. This will give us a really nice way of beginning our comparison of how the one kind of writing works versus the other one. First, we have the popular source, and the title of this one is Lasers Could Send Missions to Mars in Only 45 Days. And notice the way that right off the bat, the title of our popular source contains words that the general public will find interesting right from the beginning. Lasers, Mars, only 45 days. We have a single author, Matt Williams, and he describes himself in the bio that he's composed as a freelance writer, a science fiction author, and Taekwondo instructor. Notice that in particular, the three of those things don't necessarily coincide. You could be a writer without being a science fiction author. You could be a science fiction author without being a writer, and neither of those things necessarily go along with being an instructor of Taekwondo. The sources are singular here. It is an academic article on the same topic. There is no editor indicated. The purpose of this article is to inform or entertain, to supply background knowledge to the reader. Specifically, it discusses what DE or directed energy is. And after that, it explains some basic concepts from physics. It explains the current state of the theoretical study of interstellar travel, but it does so in a highly audience friendly way. And lastly, it explains the basic details of the recent study that the whole article is about. Finally, we have a popular source that is about 5 pages long, but that contains many graphics and many really long excerpts from the scholarly article. It's published on the website called Universe Today. It's sponsored, or at least it was sponsored at the moment that I accessed it, by at least four different entities, the being YouTube, AT&T, Creaform Professional 3D Scanners, and Mimi Used Lasers, excuse me. But the way that many websites work is mirrored here. These change based on browsing habits. In specific, YouTube probably came up because I use it a lot. Finally, this website is described as simply having to do with, quote, space and astronomy news. And notice that that is quite broad. Think then of the scholarly article, on the other hand. The title of this article is Design of a Rapid Transit to Mars Mission Using Laser Thermal Propulsion. It's got a lot of the same buzzwords, but they're being used in different ways. In fact, they're being used in ways that have to do with the specific understanding in this article, not just the sort of general understanding that the general public might have. Right? For example, we don't really know what rapid transit means in the context of traveling in space. Um, Mars is Mars, I suppose, but we have to wonder why rapid transit to Mars is so important. And finally, we have laser thermal being used as a way of narrowing in on exactly what sort of laser propulsion is going to be discussed here. In terms of authors, notice that actually we have a quality that is shared in lots of other academic discourse. There are many of them, and they all work together in the research for and writing of the article. They're also all affiliated with the Department of Mechanical Engineering at McGill University in Canada. There are 40 source references over 3 pages at the end of this article, and the sources are specialized, mostly scholarly, and no single reference is written on the exact same subject and topic. So, unlike our popular discourse article, this isn't based on anyone else's article about the exact same thing. Instead, it is doing its own new, different thing that no one else has done yet by combining all the resources it uses. It's peer reviewed by same field experts for accuracy of content and approach. It presents the feasibility of directed energy rapid propulsion system to and from Mars. And the article is 16 pages long, followed by 3.5 pages of definitions and references, which is very different than any piece of popular writing would work. It's published in Acta Astronica, which is a journal sponsored by the International Academy of Aeronautics, edited by Rakjen Shing Chern, who is a well known expert in that specific field. It focuses on engineering, life, and social space sciences, space technologies, including the peaceful scientific exploration of space, its exploration for human welfare and progress, and the conception, design, development, and operation of space-borne and Earth-based systems. Having finished up with that comparison of popular versus academic discourse, let's think a little bit more about how discourse tends to work. What follows is a theoretical model, called the CARS model. And this is a very nice framework for understanding the way that I would argue most academic discourse works. Constant ongoing communication between scholars who specialize in a single discipline and focus are actually the very thing that give rise to the CARS model and also causes these sorts of sources to work within that same model. Within scholarly research articles, academic prose uses the creating a research space CARS model, and that's what it stands for. Again, creating a research space. There are three general steps to this. Number one, establish the situation in the field or discipline. Number two, establish what it is that needs to be further or better understood. Number three, present new research, knowledge, or understanding that addresses the situation in the field and shows exactly what it is that is being understood better somehow. First, we establish the situation in the field or discipline. We claim, argue for importance of the focus of the research. We make generalizations about the focus of the research in the context of the field or discipline, and we review previous research on the focus of the current research to see what other people have done before. Next, as we establish what it is that needs to be further or better understood, one or more of the following will take place. We could use a counterclaim, or we find a piece of recent research having to do with the same subject matter focus, and we make a claim that is to the contrary of what that research is based on. We point out a gap, or simply something about that research that hasn't yet been done. We raise questions as a way of showing that there is some uncertainty that still exists having to do with that body of subject matter. Or lastly, we continue some ongoing disciplinary research as a way of taking what's already been done and simply carrying it forward. As we then present new research, knowledge, or understanding, we discuss the purposes for the research, announce conclusions, principal findings of present research, and refer to the article structure as a way of making clear exactly what it is about that structure and where we are. Finally, we do that as a way of telling our reader that this is where we're presenting the new way of understanding or the new claims that we'll make. As you take a look through the scholarly article that you decide to use, that again is on the same subject as your popular discourse analysis, you'll want to go through that and use some form of annotation to start making sense of what's in it. First, and again, this is where you'll want to access this presentation through the link that will be posted along with this video. I highly recommend taking a look at the the short video called How to Annotate Text While Reading. It's really useful. Also, I have a direct link to the UNC Chapel Hill website that talks about annotating texts. In general, with annotations, we want to summarize key points, such as main ideas, arguments, and evidence. To do this, we look for headers and words in bold. We also use the organization of the text as a guide. As we annotate, we identify key concepts and we work to respond to what we read. Remember that any form of annotation is actually putting us in dialogue with the reading. Further, from the same website, consider that there are some symbols that you might use. We could have a question mark for a question or something you need to explore further. We could have an exclamation point for something interesting, a connection, or otherwise worthy of note. We could have an asterisk for anything that you might use as an example or evidence yourself. Further, if we think about highlighting or underlining definitions, explanations, or otherwise connected research can be helpful. It will take practice to determine what's worth underlining and what's not. Think about this though, if too much gets underlined or highlighted, then it's sort of the same as not underlining or highlighting anything, right? If everything's important, then by definition, nothing is. So, be careful not to do too much underlining or highlighting because it will render it impossible to really know what the important bits are versus everything else. There is posted to Blackboard, and again, there's a direct link to it here, an example annotated article. It is from my own field. It's called Non-Cognitive Predictors of Student Success in College. The annotations that you'll find there have to do with how the article is written. They have to do with the structure of the argument, the statements of ideas, important theories or concepts, lists, introductory phrases, reiterated points, data labels or responses, definitions, and all of this comes together so that eventually we reach the main goal of annotations, being to create a map of the text through the annotations we make on it. In writing or academic discourse analysis, we'll want to refer back to Baserman Chapter 7. And like I said in the directions for that set of reading questions, it was probably worth taking the time to do those carefully because the content of Chapter 7 will have a lot to do with how this essay gets written. So we select a suitable text to analyze, read the selection carefully with attention to detail, focus on the details of the writer's technique, reflect on the overall purpose the author may have had, decide on a main analytical statement and supporting statements and evidence, and finally reread just to make sure that everything really is the way that we thought it was. There are questions to answer as you read, including number one, who is the author? What are his, her, or their qualifications? What institution or institutions is the author affiliated with? How does the author make the case that their analysis of the article's topic, whatever form it might take, is important and necessary? What subject area or discipline is the author writing from the perspective of? How does this perspective shape what the author is able to say about the topic? If the author reviews what other people have written, why does the author do that? And what conclusions does the author draw from that review of previous writing? What point does the author of your article make about the topic? How does that point build upon or go beyond what other people have said about it? How does your author support his, her, or their findings? A study? A survey? Is it an experiment of some sort? Is it some other sort of analysis? What sort of data was collected and used? Finally, then, the most important question of all is this: how are your findings in the article you have chosen similar to your findings in the public discourse analysis essay you wrote earlier this semester? How does public discourse about your subject and topic coincide with academic discourse about your subject and topic? How is the discourse in the article different from the discourse in social media? How does the version of the topic we get in public discourse differ from the one that we get through surveying academic discourse?